So now that I've got all my pulleys, I drove out all the bearings and put in new ones. Now we got to assemble it, and there's 8 of these, and it can get really confusing. I don't know if there's any spring difference between these because they look to be identical. The only difference that I can see is the pulleys, but I also can't measure it. So you could mark it, but I just basically I took a video and a picture of it, so I know which one's which. When it comes to these, there's an idler tensioner for 2 belts, right? The supercharger is the one that's splined, and it's got 8. Right, so this other one looks just like it, but it's only got 6. That's wrong. This one's for the supercharger. You set it to the side. And then we have this other one, which is a smaller pulley. It's like 75 millimeters versus the 90 millimeter. Okay, so this is a short one. When you put it in, this is the way that it came out. Right, so the open space is on the bottom. And on this one, the open space is on the bottom. I'm not going to use any Loctite or anything. 13 millimeter or 1/2 inch. Either or for this one probably be fine, but we're just going to go ahead and I'm going to start them by hand. I'm just going to put them in, and I'm going to tighten them up, and we're going to put this one in first. Any of the supercharger stuff, that's going to come in after the fact. So any of the stuff that's really wide, just put it off to the side. These other ones with 6, those are the accessory belt. The accessory belt has to go on first. Regarding this pulley, now this is the extension pulley, right? And because of the way that it's designed with this flange, it piggybacks off of this, and it makes it impossible to pull the belt out without pulling it. This belt I would like to replace, but at the moment I'm having such a hard time getting this off that I'm not gonna bother with it, because I'm literally gonna have to grab a torch and everything else. I'd rather pull it back off, or even send it to another shop and just have them do it. But right now I just want to get the car running, and I don't want it to be chirping. The belt should be replaced, but I'm having a hard time getting to it, so I'm not going to do that right now. Anyway, so this needs to be done. There's idler pulleys and whatnot in here. I'm going to put on the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the idler pulley, but I would like to point out that when you put the pulley in, you want to make sure that the idler pulley is in between, because if not, you're going to have to try and come and put it around it, because the arm is on the outside, not on the inside. So just keep that in mind when you go to do this. And also, it wouldn't hurt to try and get the belt down underneath of this. I can't tell what that is. I think it's the AC compressor. Anyhow, it's probably easiest to just get it in underneath, because as far as the belt, it goes in between the crank pulley and this other pulley, right? And it rides up kind of like a loop. So we're going to do that first. When we go to put it in, we're going to be using these. There's 3 of them. All right, so we're going to grab our pulley, and we're going to make sure that our belt is up kind of in that loop in between the AC compressor and the other one. If you don't do this, then you're going to have a hard time getting the pulley back in place, or I should say getting the belt around the pulley. So again, I'm trying to loop the belt around so it's not going to fight me. And then I'm just going to drop it in to position right here. And these are 10 millimeter head bolts. And they're probably, I don't know, about 40 millimeters long, something like that. I'm just going to get them started and get the other idler pulleys and stuff kind of positioned. And then we'll get the belt and put it back on. I'm just going to do this one while I'm at it. This is one of the wider supercharger pulleys. So I'm just going to go ahead and, while I'm in here, put it in place. And I know which one's which because I put the bolts back in the holes. So in other words, I never really removed them and set them off to the side. Okay, that one's good. I'm also going to spin it just to make sure there's no problems with it. And I'm just looking at the line, and the line seems to be in the same spot, so there's no wobble, no whine, none of that stuff. So this next one is blind with 6 ridges. Go ahead and put this one in. Again, 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter. It's funny, I would believe that this would be a 13 millimeter, but the wrench set that I have, literally it doesn't have a 13. It just has a 1/2 inch. It just skips it. It goes from 12 millimeter to 14 millimeter. This probably would actually be better done with a socket and ratchet, because I'm having a hard time getting a bite on it. Okay, we're tight there. Spin it. Everything spins nice and smooth. There's no wobble. Move on to the next one. Next one I'm going to do is this one. This is also one of the other 6 blinds. Sketch that. Okay, let's just snug this up some. And then we're good there. And then I'm going to have one more, which if I'm not mistaken is a smooth idler. Alright, so this last one is one of the thinner smooth pulleys. It's 90 millimeter instead of 75. Tighten this up. I'm also going to have to go back and, now I'm pretty sure that I got all the routing correct, I'm going to tighten up those 10 millimeters for the tensioner. And then we're going to have to grab a 1/2 inch breaker bar and basically put spring tension on it and then route the belt. Again, these are aluminum, and I'm sure there's a torque spec, but I don't want to spend all day looking up the torque spec when it's basically, it's going to move and you're going to feel it tighten up and then just stop. I got a good amount of pressure. Say maybe if I was lifting like 5 or 10 pounds, something like that, I'm pulling on it and it'll just stop. It won't want to move anymore. So everything's tight. Now it's just a matter of rerouting the belt and then taking some of the you're adding tension to the idler pulley, but you're creating enough space for the belt to actually go. This is a 1/2 inch breaker bar, and we're not talking about this. Most people know what this is already, but just in the case that you've never worked on a car before or don't know your way around a toolbox, this is the 1/2 inch portion of it, right? And very typically on Ford or GM products or whatnot, this is spring loaded, and whether you use a 1/2 inch breaker bar with a longer handle or use some type of ratchet, this is what it's for. You hook it in there, and then you can basically, this has got a spring inside here, you can take the tension off of it, or I should say apply tension, so I can get the belt around it. So what I'm going to do, I can't remember which way I came in on this one. I think it was this way. One of the things that's kind of irritating is a lot of this other stuff gets in your way. Like so. I have the spring on here, if you can see it moving, but I can only pull it so far, right? So because of that, what I'm going to have to do, I'm going to take this top one off, because that's the one that I think is going to be easiest to do. I'm going to get everything else routed. There's a little lip on this front water pump pulley which I think is there's not enough space to get around it. So I've got everything routed, and now you can see I just need to get it around here. If there's any slop in here, or I should say if it's not lined up properly, this is going to pose an issue. I won't be able to get the belt around it. So, like for example, right now it's tight because I didn't quite have it around the power steering pump pulley, and now you can see that it's closer. All right, so let's give this a shot. All right, hopefully I got it right. Push this down, and I'm grabbing the belt, and then I'm just going to release. Now, the smooth pulleys is not a problem. It'll correct itself just as soon as we spin it around. But you need to make sure that these are actually lined up, because otherwise if it's riding up on the edge, we're going to have a problem. So I'm going to get a flashlight and make absolutely sure that that's not the case. And from what I can see, it looks good, but you don't want to guess, okay? One of the things is, as soon as that's done, we're straight up, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the other pulleys on for the supercharger. So what I'm specifically looking for is just to make sure that this isn't riding up on the edge. And if it is riding up on the edge, just grab your breaker bar and pull on it and give it some slack and push it back into place. And that's pretty much it. But I can see the one down there for the AC pump is good. The smooth ones will correct themselves, so I'm not worried about that. This idler up here is good, and that idler there is good. So this is good. I would really like to replace this belt, but I just don't want to deal with doing this. I'm literally in the backyard right now. This is not inside of one of the garages, so I don't want to mess with it right now, but I will come back to it for sure. This, unfortunately, is not so easy. There's a bunch of pulleys and, or I should say, hoses, and trying to get it in place is it's a bit of a challenge. I know that I had a hard time getting it out, and I don't want to be scratching up the engine, valve covers and stuff like that. So I don't think I came in from this way. See, I might have. The biggest deal is all of these hoses, and they're not all rubber. Some of them they're aluminum. And if I remember right, I took this loose to get it out of the way. You know, because cars were engineered to be worked on, right? You know, as an engineer, I can say this: automotive engineers are not my favorite people, because it's like they don't care about the guy that's repairing it. Alright. So again, a bunch of stuff in the way. I need to get it back in behind, and easier said than done. So like this tube, for example, this tube is a bit of an issue because of this lip. It's got to be back in behind, unless I can get this thing up and over. And then there's a radiator support right there. Almost cleared it. Almost. A lot of times this is done when the car is not, when the engine's not in the car. Literally, I'm like a half inch. There we go, right there. Bring it back. get it over this bolt and inside. Like I said, this was a real chore getting it out, so I was kind of expecting it to be the same coming in. All right, once I got past that reservoir, now we're okay. All right, one of the things about it is there's 2 bolts in here, and they look like this. So there's a couple bolts that hold this, but I was having such a hard time that this actually should have been left in here, because you can see I now have to get it in. So pull it forward again. If you do this and forget about it, we're gonna have a problem, because you're not gonna get the bolt back in. It wasn't actually supposed to have fallen out like it did. So all that horrible contortionary work that I was just doing, I might have to do again, depending. Ouch. This is totally fighting me. Like I said, that was supposed to have come out before. I should have put it back in, and I didn't realize it came out. All right, there we go. So now I got it in place. I'll line these 2 long bolts up, and I need to get this one threaded in, and then we'll move on from there. But yeah, it's kind of a challenge getting this piece in and out. If the radiator wasn't in here, and like the AC and that type of stuff, the cooling lines, it wouldn't be a problem. So this is an 18mm bolt. Again, this is going into aluminum, so we're not going to crank on this. I just don't want it backing off, so I'm just going to grab a hold and pull it tight. Okay, and then this other piece is going to slide all the way back, and then we're going to have nuts like these to hold them in place. Okay, I'm just going to get them started. So I'm going to put in another one of these. If you look at the tools that I have left, or the parts that I have left, they're all pretty much the same, except for the head on this one is bigger, if you notice. Now I'm pretty sure this one is for down below. I haven't put that on the other pulley. But all these other ones, there is a change in the color, but I know that these 3 were used for the other idler pulley, which hasn't been installed yet. So then I have these other ones, and one of them goes down inside here. Now the interesting thing is this piece, I'm sure I took a picture of it, but it's supposed to be held, I'm pretty sure, by this bolt. So I'm going to slap it back into place first with this. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, it's probably this one. Okay, so I'm just going to put this one in by itself. So this last one, 10mm, that's good. I should have done a better job of recording these. I took pictures and stuff. Finding the stuff after the fact, a lot harder to do, because then you kind of got to figure out what's going on. Obviously this is a shorter bolt. Put this one in place, and then Again, a ratchet would be much easier to do because of the limited angle that I have. Snug that up. Call that good. This other piece I kind of had to pull out of the way a little bit. Put that in. And then put this nut on it. This is one of the smaller nuts. There's only a couple of these. It's also the 10mm. Right, so this is not anything structural. It's just holding this one component in place. So as far as this side is concerned, we're pretty good. All right, so out of the bolts that we have left over, again, this one's got a heavier head on it. Now, the afterthought on this engine was let's put a supercharger on it, because originally when Ford was doing this, this was a 32 valve non-supercharged. It was an aspirated one like they put in the Mach 1s for 2003. And then one of the guys made the call to put a supercharger on it. So we extended everything, we brought it forward. There are 3 of these that go to the extension for the crankcase extender pulley, right, for the supercharger. And my intent was to take them loose, but I couldn't get the pulley loose, so I'm just gonna put it back together. Okay, so these 3 they're kind of a bear to get to. The top one's pretty easy. The other 2 are down below. If this was up in the air, it'd be a lot easier for me to do it, but it's not, so I can't crawl underneath the car. Even maybe if you did it with an extension, you'd probably be okay. So, about the only thing we have left to do is put on the belt, and then also these brackets and things, right? So, like I like to do, I like to put the nuts back where I pulled them off if you can. So there's if you see right here, there's a bolt that sticks out, and this bracket has got to go on it so I can slide it in. Okay. So for this, there's 3 points. There's this one down here, which you can see that there's a nut that's going to be kind of hard to get to. And as far as the nuts that are left over, if you can see, I have more than one size, right? So the one for the top I left on here, and then there's the other 2 that go onto this bracket. So they're 13mm, and I'm just going to slide it in. Again, this other one's going to be harder to get to. It's the 13mm. Yeah. That's the thing, again, about designing a car with so many components. If I'm not mistaken, I had my little boy do this because he could get his hands in here and I couldn't. Alright, so alternatively I could have maybe left this bracket on and pulled a little reservoir. I can barely get to it with my fingers. Especially now that it's spinning tight, like there's a burr or something on it. That's not good. Alright, so I'm going to get a ratchet in there. And then go ahead and put this bracket on. And just tighten everything up. As lame as this is, sometimes it's just easier to take the extra stuff off, and in this case I'm having such a hard time getting that one bolt that I think that I'm going to do that. The only one that's kind of hard to get to is this one up in the front, but it's not so terrible. Still not easy. Alright, these are just little screws. I'd rather take the time and pull the extra stuff loose than try and force it and then break one of these reservoirs or something, or one of the lines. Alright, see, now that that's out of the way, I can access it pretty easy. And I actually have a ratchet on here. but I'm finding that I can't get it off after the fact. So irritating. Even this reservoir keeps hitting the switching directions. Finally. Okay, that's tight. That's tight. Okay, so that's not a 10 millimeter. And it's not a 12. 7/16. I hate that. Alright, so I'll go ahead and put my screws back in. These are self-starting, but I still want to make sure that I don't cross-thread. Okay, I'm gonna find that. So at this point, I have 5 bolts left. All the stuff for this cover are still in place, right? So 3 of the shiny ones, these are gonna be for the idler pulley. So that means I've got 2 of these, and the first one is right in here on the very top. Obviously a ratchet would work much better than this, but I got it most of the way in with my finger, so. Alright, so that's now tight. And then there's one more. There's one more I got in my hand, and we're gonna have to see where that went. Alright, so this is a miss on my part. It's back in underneath here. Right, and in all honesty, this pulley is kind of in my way. So I'm just gonna pull it off real quick. I should have put it on first, but the reality is this pulley was already put on. I took it out this way, so I didn't think about it. So this will open up just a little bit of space for me to get in here. Inside, right underneath of the pulley, is not the hole. Yeah, it's not underneath, there's a little insert off to the side, like a little cutout. You can't, obviously you can't see it, right? It's underneath. So for this one, I'm most certainly going to try and use a ratchet. Now, one of the things that's irritating is all the stuff is still in your way. See that or not, but it's back in underneath, and it's recessed, so you can't see it from the top very well. Shit, maybe at a mirror or something. Okay, so that's not. I'll put the pulley back on, and then it's time for the idler and the supercharger belt. It's one of the things I don't necessarily like about the ratchets is simply that they're hard to get in and out. Now I've got this like a low profile gear ratchet set. But still, now that the tubes are all tightened up and stuff, snug this up. Now this is the one pulley that I replaced years ago, and it seems to be okay. So this is the only one that I didn't put a bearing in, and as you can hear or not hear, it's perfectly fine. All right, so the next thing is going to be the idler bracket. All right, so at this point, you would have most certainly found out that you had the wrong one if this isn't the 8. But this is the one with the 8 ribs on it for the supercharger belt. It's interesting. So you can see just ever so slightly there's a amount of play in here. That shouldn't be an issue. These are good for basically pulling in one direction. They're not good for twisting or pulling in this direction very much. But we shall see. Because I'm pretty sure that I got it tight. Yeah, it's tight. That plays all bearing. Okay, so regarding the orientation of this needs to be pointed towards the front of the car so you can get to it. And there are just 3 bolt holes with these 3 long 10mm head bolts. Slide it in here and get the bolt started. Not a whole lot of room for your hands in here. Need to get this other one back in. Now you want to get all of them started before you tighten anything, because there's play inside of this, and you might get a situation where the threads are grinding up against the metal. And in this case, since it's aluminum and it's material softer, the alignment's probably not as big of an issue, but you'll find, especially with hardened bolts and hardened other things like steel into steel, the problem is when you go to do this, it ends up rolling over the edge, and it'll get caught in the threads because now it's not nice and smooth. And what'll end up happening is it just damages the threads. Now I realize I'm doing this all with hand tools. I have air wrenches and all the other stuff. Anything that you could ask for, I have all that stuff. But for something like this, I don't know, I just kind of, it's hard to get any room in there, and especially when you got an air hose, it means the length of it's really long, and especially like an air ratchet. I'm not a big fan of those. Those things are instant torque, and they can pinch your fingers, and at least I have that memory of when I was a little kid. My dad would hand me an air ratchet and tell me to do something. If you weren't holding on to it, it would get away from you. One of the reasons why these bolts are so long is because it's going into aluminum, and it makes it more structural. You're less of a chance of you ripping the threads out. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and snug these up. Again, they don't need to be super tight, they're just going into aluminum. One of the reasons why I would kind of prefer the wrench is they don't have as much meat on them as a ratchet, although they do go flying from time to time. Just grab a hold of it, snug it up. Now, one of the things I want to make sure is that I didn't do any what I would call collateral damage. That's put something in place or not being paying attention, have something rubbing up against the belts or something like that. So we need to look at that. All right, so there's no way I got one of these above the other one, right? So we have this little reservoir right here, and I just want to make sure that it's bracketed. This moves, this other piece right here moves, but it doesn't move very much. So I'm not too terribly worried about it damaging anything. Pretty sure that's how it was, just straight from the factory. And I don't see anything out of place. Let's see, you know, because sometimes you might get in here and you might push one of the hoses, and if it starts rubbing up against something, we're going to have a problem down the road. And what happened was I was driving, then all of a sudden I got basically like a battery light that came on the car, and then the power dropped out, and I didn't quite understand what was happening until I popped the hood, and the other belt was literally chewed in half, and this pulley down here, basically it got frozen. I didn't catch it, I didn't check, because I've never seen it happen before. I didn't even know to check. I put on the new one and I started it up and then realized that something went wrong, and it only ran for a few seconds, but you can see that it took the writing off the end of it. This is one of the, I believe it's a green series. Actually, you know what this one says? This one says Napa on it. 08074. So, anyways, as far as this belt is concerned, I'm just going to go ahead and put it on. This one is a little bit shorter than a factory belt, and the reason being is this isn't the factory pulley. This pulley is shorter, so if you want the supercharger to spin up faster, either you replace this pulley or you replace the bottom extender pulley with a bigger one or a smaller one. You can only go so small with this, and then we start running into problems, right? So I forget what this is. I think it's a 2.9 inch pulley. The factory was like over 3 inches, and some people are running like a 2.83. Anyways, it just spins this up faster. Of course, it can also take out bearings and stuff like that, so I probably wouldn't want to push it too much. Anyways, yeah, so we're going to do what we did before. I'm going to route it, and then I think the easiest place to put it on is right up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to route this in the positions that I saw in the drawing, and then we're just going to go ahead and we're going to put the tensioner on, make sure everything's okay. I'm going to put the cover on, and unfortunately the car won't start because it's been sitting here with the dead battery. But once that's done, I probably will have lost all my sunlight at that point. I'm going to put a battery charger on here, and I'm going to fire this thing up. Alright, so when I put these in, probably the very first thing that I want to get to is the alternator. And I've had to do this a number of times because I've had several alternators, Ford alternators, go out. And when you go to buy these, they're a little bit different because this alternator runs off of an 8-ribbed pulley and belt versus the other ones, which I believe would have been 6. So this is probably the hardest to get to. That's why I'm going to try and get to it. All right, so I got the alternator pulley on, and then it's going to go over, there's a smooth idler. I'm going to, basically, it's going to go over that and then underneath to the crank extension pulley for the supercharger. You know what? All right, damn it. I forgot about this. I kind of screwed up. See how there's no gap in here? This needs to go inside, right? So I can't put the belt in. This is what I was talking about beforehand. I can't put the belt in unless I take it loose. So the belt should have been put in place before I put it in. So we got to redo that. So realistically, you don't have to pull it all the way out, but you do have to pull it out enough that you can fit the belt back behind it. Right, then it's going to come underneath of this one, and this other one is going to loop underneath of the smooth belt, like this. Okay, so you can kind of see how it's fitting. And then this supercharger pulley is basically, you're going to have a loop like this. So before we do that, I want to tighten back up that idler pulley. All right, so I'm going to have my breaker bar. Going to put it in place. I have this rerouted, right? So everything is pretty close to where it needs to be. You can see it needs to come up here. If they're not in the pulley correctly, it's going to be a lot harder to get this on. I think we're okay. All right, so I'm gonna just push it down as much as I can. And in this case, like, there's hoses and stuff in my way. So that's as much as I can. And I can get it down on the top, but this other pulley popped out. Okay. All right, so that's it. The pulley's in, or the belt's in on all the pulleys. I still want to make sure that they didn't jump. Yeah. Come here. Right down in here. Right down in here. See it? It's not on the right one. You have to catch this. If you don't catch this, can you see how it's jumped over?
Yeah.
Right, so if you don't catch this and you start the car, maybe it'll snap in place, maybe it'll burn up your new belt. So all we have to do is just go ahead and take pressure off this and move it in by hand. There we go. All right, that's better. That's better. I'm gonna...
Looks like another pulley slipped off.
Which one?
The one right to the right. It's not on the pulley.
No, it's fine. I'm looking at it. All right, so we're gonna pull it down, pull it up, make sure everything looks good. I think we're good there. And then this other little pulley on the side is probably the easiest to get it because there's no flange, right? The flange means there's larger radius, and then we'll double check. That looks good. The alternator looks good. Idler looks good. Okay, everything looks good. So at this point, let's go ahead and pull my cheater bar back out. Some people run without the cover, but I have the cover. There's no reason not to run with the cover without the cover, so I'm going to. Suppose you're working in here and somebody puts their finger in the belt or something, smash it to nothing. All right, so for this one, there's two bolts in the nut. I put them back on the supercharger because I don't want them to get confused, right? Pull that one off. I'm gonna pull this one off right here. This is the bolt. And then there's another one underneath in between, which is basically this one attaches to. Go ahead and spin this one loose. Grab my cover and set it in place. I'm just going to go ahead and get them started. And then this other one, again, it's underneath, it's a little bit harder to see. So I'm going to bring them up just so they're touching beforehand, that way there's no, I don't want anything bent. And then I just got to grab a 10mm wrench. I think it's a 10. This obviously would be much better with a ratchet, so I'm going to do that. These are not 10mm. They're much smaller. Just want to grab the ratchet, and these are 8mm. Okay, so it's tight. Now, one of the things that maybe I caught on camera, maybe I didn't, was I made sure that everything was tightened. I went back and I checked to make sure that I didn't miss any bolts or any of that other stuff. So this thing's back together. Obviously, I can't start it because the battery's dead. I do want to check a couple other things. I want to make sure that I'm good on radiator fluid and stuff. It also kind of looks like my supercharger intercooler fluid is completely dry, which doesn't make me happy, because that means there's a leak somewhere. I got to figure out where that went, and then other stuff. I just want to make sure I got enough oil, and this has never been an issue. Radiator fluid, although it seems to be a little low. Anyhow, we can go ahead and check all that stuff, and but as far as this belt replacement is concerned, it's done. I just need to start it up, make sure it's not squealing or any of that other stuff, and we'll be good to go.